Hello, everyone. Hello, Marshall or Dominique, Paul, Naveen.
Hello.
Hi there.
Hello.
Good to see you all. Thank you for coming to my class today. I think we can start. I will pull the slides and see where to start with the first slide. Okay. So today we are going to cover the other operator in the snippet side. We did in title, we did in text. The third one or the last one that is categorized under snippets is the in URL. To understand in URL better, you must first look up the structure of how the URLs are typically, hi Dale, we just started, so we're not too late. So to understand the structure of, or we call it the stem of URL, which is how the URLs are set usually, and URLs are the only navigational side of how the pages are found by instructing the search or instructing anything on the web pages to hop from or to move from one page to another. And even for us to go to a specific domain, we certainly will be depending on executing that command through a protocol called HTTP, which is attached to the stem of URL. And this is where the URL tells the search to go and find that specific page on that particular location. So everything that moves with your intent of finding something on the internet will have to depend on how the URLs are structured. So let's look at the formation of a URL. We'll begin with understanding a very simplified version of a URL, because URLs can be very complex and they would carry a lot of information. It's more like a DNA of navigation, which tells the search where to go and look for that particular document. Here is a simplified version of a URL, typical URL. And you could see that it starts with something called HTTPS. HTTP or HTTPS are protocols. Protocols are a set of instructions or a language that talks to each other through a unified formation or a unified handshake that allows for the other protocols to recognize it for its identity. In the case of what HTTP and HTTPS identifies with is the secure formation of something that would allow for the URLs without being altered to proceed and look for a page that cannot be extracted, deciphered, or in certain cases, it is responsible for encrypting the entire length or the formation of a URL. So HTTPS is just a protocol, and this is why it is here, for it to be recognized in the internet system. So with the 2 colons and 2 backslashes, it means it is the beginning of telling the search for which domain it needs to look for or it defaults initially to a domain that is a name or something that we acquire by paying for it to the registrar of domains, and therefore it is more like an asset, or it is a possession of a physical being, in the sense that it has a value attached to it. It is not tangible where you can physically pick it up, but tangible enough so that it becomes valuable asset, and therefore it is named and given the, and no same domain name can be registered or can be acquired by two different parties. So there is absolutely no conflict, and it is unique. Therefore the domain name in this case is simplified, and the way it is set is that starts with www, which means it's worldwide internet. And these days you don't really need to write www. It is by default assumed to be followed by a domain name. So it wouldn't matter if you only wrote abccompany.com and not worry about www. So when the query or anything that you click on with the hyperlink we call something that is actionable URL, and it actually can execute by taking you to another page or another website. So basically with the domain name that is followed by either .com, .net, and there are several other extensions which sort of gives an indication of what type of domain it is, or if it is coming from educational institutions, or it's military related, or it's international organizations, and so on. They are given or allotted by permission certain extensions. Some of the extensions are difficult to get, like .edu and .mil. Similarly, another set of domain names that has an extension which goes further than .com, like .com, .uk, or .co.uk, are also dependent on where the IP is allocated, or in which group those domains are registered based on regional bound specific regions. For instance, in UK it is .co.uk, and so on. So it has a kind of an information. If you understand how to interpret it, you would know where it is coming from initially, or where it was registered, talking about domain name, or whether or not it is coming from educational institution, or when you want to ensure that you have a source that you can rely on. So more authentic being .edu, .orgs to a certain extent. .mil, of course, it belongs to military in North America, so that is also something that is not easily obtained, and it is kept or reserved for that specific source. What follows a domain name with a backslash means that the domain now is leading you to a specific website which is staged or which is hosted on a server somewhere. And within the server, it has a structure built in, which is more like your folders you keep on your desktops. And those folders may have different pages or subdirectories, or within a folder you can have subfolders, could be another subfolder to the second one and the third. And eventually within the last folder, or the folder which actually holds the file itself, whether it may be doc or PDF or HTML, whatever it may be, that's where it's going to lead to when you start to look for any specific document. So similarly, in the web server, you put your websites in a way that is discovered by the Internet Protocol, HTTPS, and those pages attached to the folders, and eventually the folders leading to the document, are basically giving the information set that you can easily view by looking at the URL and figuring out where it's going to lead you to, or in which folder a certain document is set. Eventually, when the document is called, let's say a document has a name or a title, and when you are asking the search to find that specific title document, it should have a name or a title to it that is part of the URL. And I'm going to explain all of this with this example in front of you. So with the first backward slash, it is saying now that domain is defaulting on another folder that it's contained in that specific domain, and that folder is named products, for instance. So this becomes more like a directory or a folder name, and therefore the one in blue which says products is a folder name. Anything that follows this folder name with another backslash means that within this folder there could be a document and whose name or title is shown in green color, for instance, Internet Research Techniques Executives Recruiters. So this could be the title of that specific document that is held inside of a folder called products. And basically you are searching in a domain for pages that are attached to this domain that has a folder named products. And therefore, in the simplest form, you can just dissect it into different compartments, or you can basically segment it according to the backslashes or number of backslashes. So if, for instance, I had after a product, let me see if I can, it's going to let me make those. In fact, it's not going to let me do that. Let me try. I just want to explain something specific, which could be give you a best example. Oh God. So if I had a domain HTTPS, let me zoom in a little bit. One more. So writing a domain name let's suppose the title of the page, which has got the text format that you saw in green color, supposing that is not held in the main folder product, it may be existing in a subfolder to the main folder product here. So it may have something called training, or it may have what is written here, recruiters, and then let's say it says Internet Research Techniques. That's a long one. Executive recruiters, eh? So if I have and I'll even go further and put HTML over here, or HTML. So now by modifying a little bit, I'm going to explain to you where the search needs to find, let's say, these words or these documents, which is named, or the title of which is Internet Research Techniques Executive Recruiters. Where this document is set or where it is kept is in a folder called recruiters, which is a subfolder to a folder named training, and the main folder which contains both the document training and recruiters are held inside of the products. So basically what it's done is told the search to find within the folder product the subfolder named training, the subfolder to training named, I'm just doing this greater than sign just to tell you that hierarchy exists here, recruiters. And then these are folders. And then what you have within folders is the title of the document. Let's call it title being and one more element to it that I'll mention. It's called document type. So this could be HTML, this could be PDF, this could be TXT, could be doc. Okay, so these could be the extensions that come in after the last dot or something which is unlike these dashes over here. It does not have, I mean, it has got a period or a dot, and anything beyond the dot is usually the type of document that is represented by this title. So this title is in a format, or the title tag of this document contains these words, whereas after the dot, the extension can be HTML, PDF, or whatever might be the format of the document. All right. So what is it that the in URL is going to query first of all? So let me just make it a little bit better. Let's just call it folders. Okay. All right. So this is the simple way of writing the URL, or this is how the convention is, or it could be without the www as well. In any case, what is important is for us to understand what the in URL is supposed to do, why we use in URL with the colon sign. When we are doing in URL, we are asking the search to look for matching words. Let's suppose there is a word here. And by the way, I didn't want to forget this. You must be wondering why or what is the significance of these dashes over here, or would these dashes have anything or any impact on your search when you're only trying to match the words using in URL, for instance. So for your information, these dashes are ignored totally by the search when it comes to querying using in URL specifically. Besides, whenever you are trying to put something like, and this is coming from the coding side. So the convention of writing URL is that you want to separate words from each other, unlike the way in which we did our A and D commands and all the booleans we used. That has nothing to do with what we are about to understand, or for our understanding, dash is not something that is connecting two words, or dash is not considered a minus or anything that has any meaning for the search. So literally, from the search point of view, it is looking at the title, which is this one, interpreted as if it is just a placeholder that is responsible for separating words, or consider dash as a gap or a single character gap between two words. It is more like a differentiator or separator between words only. So literally, the search would consider it as one long sentence, a search phrase, or even individual words as being set one next to another, without having any significance in terms of how it would consider it as a phrase, which is where we would have, or should have written it like, where we would have assumed it to be a single search phrase, as if it is set like this. This is not how the in URL is going to function. It's not going to think of it as a search phrase. It is, so this is incorrect. Similarly, if it is to be considered as individual words, search might look for these two in combination, or attach this with these with executives or executive recruiters separately. So it's going to then have a logic which is similar to where we have to consider individual keywords as separate and not combined together in a search phrase, or it is not considered sequentially mandatory or to be assumed as a phrase in any sense. It's just going to be a combination of words, or it may just look for these two words, or it may look for just this word when you run in URL command. The caveat with or the only drawback when you are doing any query with in URL is that you have to ensure that all words are in singular or plurals, or they do exist without any doubt being present in the URL, or assume that you had used internet researches instead of research. The law of, or the stabbing and lemmatization is not going to correct it. It's not going to default back to its root word. So it is not like when you use in URL, it is going to entertain both research as something that has an extended version, or something which has the plural of it. If it does not exist, or it can't find, or even if it does find, it will literally think of all these words as you have placed them. It is more considered as a verbatim, as a true replica of what you place next to the colon sign over here, which is what we are going to also observe. So even if the word research is now written incorrectly as researches, it is not going to look for research. It will literally think of it as a command that is verbatim, and this plural will probably not bring you the right page. So we have to be mindful of that. Let's start with, okay, the next thing is how much of a word matching does in URL do when the entire length of a URL is to be queried by placing words like, let's suppose I put in URL ABC company. It is still going to look for this one without, without having to use .com, because in URL only treats these as words. It's not particular about .com being a site domain name. So if you wrote ABC company, it'll still look for the stem of URLs, irrespective of whether or not ABC company has got a domain extension .com. It is to be matched for the words that are placed inside of the entire length of the URL. So ABC company, it's going to look for, now supposing I put in URL product and I put training, it's going to consider product / training as a match such as this one. So it's going to query for all the URLs that has folders product with a backslash that indicates that there is a subfolder to a product, and therefore it is going to think of backslash and the word training together as if it is a mirror match or exact match it needs to look for. So the entire length, and so we can continue, and it just, or we could also write in URL training. So what this would do is look for the word product, and in the second instance also look for the word training. Similarly, if I put in URL recruiters, and write my query like this, it's still going to find all the words, and it is going to think of recruiters as the last folder, or the folder which contains the document name Internet Research Techniques Executive Dash Recruiters. But remember that whenever you're writing a title, searching for it, you might as well get rid of the dashes and consider each of these words as being searched together as a title which is got all the words together in the same sequence, and you can write recruiters with a backslash without leaving any gaps. So if you leave a gap, it is going to create a problem. I would write it best, and to ensure that I get the better results, I would do in URL, and I would put Internet Research Techniques Executive Recruiters within quotation marks, just this way. So it is certainly going to look for the word product, the word training, the word recruiters, and the title that is set over here. Not that, if you don't put the quotation marks in close, then it would just look for a match to any of these words, or it certainly will look for the word that is after the colon, that is internet, and may consider research techniques executive recruiters, depending on what it thinks, or how you're now giving away that control to the search engine for it to discover rest of the words like research techniques executives and recruiters either together as a separate search phrase, or treat individual words something that may or may not be found within the URL, but may be contained in rest of the body of that content page, and therefore it may pick and choose techniques or recruiters or executives. So the best thing that you would rather do, if you are sure of the title, is to enclose it within the quotes. Now, as I mentioned to you that whenever you are placing something after the in URL with the colon sign, either as set of words or as a single search phrase, you want to make sure that all the words that you remember are exact same as you would like to find in the title of those or within the URL. So if you had used, instead of internet, you used internets with an S as a plural, you wouldn't find it. If you put internet search techniques, you won't get to this URL or won't get to this specific page. Okay. Normally what people do is that they like to use the operator site to ensure that the URLs are discovered within a certain domain. So they pretty much go hand in hand in most cases. But there are situations where you don't want to mention the domain name, so that to open up the search more and for the links to be found for those specific pages that defaults onto a title which may be more important and may have its location within certain type of folders and not necessarily connected to a specific domain. So in that case, you don't have to use site colon, but I'm just telling you that mostly this is a criteria, or this is pretty much like a standard practice. ABC company. My typing really sucks. Okay, so this is pretty much, I would have used it this way if I have to look for exact page. And this is not the real page. There is no domain ABC company that I know of, but I'm just explaining to you how this might work and how the in URL is useful. Okay, next thing, why do we use in URL? Like, I mean, do we really need to apply in URL colon for finding the pages when we could do in text? We could probably just, use other commands. How useful is in URL? What is the significance of it? And why do, let's say, I use it a lot? And I'll tell you, and again, we'll have to visualize because again, this is not the real domain name of some page or some site, but this is to explain it to you, and later we can do the other examples. So I'm going to talk about the usefulness of this by explaining another concept, why sometimes in URL is the only option. So supposing, which one was this? Okay, one named it. Let's call it the first search. And by the way, you don't have to worry about HTML or any of these. I would rather not put .html. It's still going to find the page unless you want to be specific with the type of document. You might want to use file type colon with the PDF. That part, I don't know if you saw it, but I have that lecture in your recorded folder or recordings folder. You can go through that, but if the need be, or if I find a gap in between our sessions, I might just send you the notes as well. Otherwise we can go through it one more time. It's just going to take 30-40 minutes. We might want to do that. So I'm kind of regretting that I gave that lecture at a time when you weren't here. So I certainly want to to make sure that I explain it, and I will, hopefully, if I can get a little bit extra time. So I'm looking at this URL once again, and I'm trying to figure out why would I use in URL. So one of the reasons is that I'm just going to shorten it. It's the same thing. One of the reasons is that supposing I want to look for news of some sort. Typically the URLs in the news websites have sections on top. As you could see that it has the specific areas like technology, politics, blogs, things like that. So I don't know if you've noticed, but as soon as you click on those links and you look at the address bar, you see that within that URL, it has a mention of that specific category, which is more like a folder that is holding the type of information or anything that is related to. So supposing if it was to do with technology and you clicked on technology on the URL, you would see the word technology as a mention of a folder, which is now telling the search to look for it at a certain location. So supposing I use or substitute product with the technology, and assuming that this is a news agency, it would have a word like technology written here. And within technology, let's suppose executive recruiter. So They might have a section that talks about internet or internet related technology. You would see that in the URL, it has a subfolder or a location that is telling the search to go from technology to internet to um, I'll just get rid of this one, to the title of the document. So this is how the shape of URL would turn up. And if we are to look for something, and by the way, it might also have another thing like news, because site might have videos, might have something else. So if it is news, then it would have the word news as the main section. Then within news, it's technology, internet, so on. So if I were to query something within news and I don't want something coming from articles or blogs or anything else which is in HTML, I might want to use the in URL operator and include the word news, which means that within the URL, the word news would certainly be the start of telling the search to look for something within news section, or the source should be from news from somewhere. In the second instance, I might just write technology, because this is typical also with the news section. Now we are just assuming, I mean, URLs can take different shapes. At times it is intentionally masked by some other words or some other URLs. But the core URL or the structuring of how it is set by the programmer has definitely some criteria, or it has some conventions. And the convention says that you have to um, within the stem of that URL, you have to indicate folders, subfolders, and everything with typical words, which is industry-wide considered standards. Like technology section, nobody writes tech, mostly it is technology. If it is blogs, it would have a section within technology, it would say blog or blogs. So you may want to, assuming that you want to get to a blog with this title that is mentioned, you may want to include in URL the word blog. So here I'm giving you one example of how I have used the in URL. And I'm preparing a query. This is what I'm doing based on this URL and the location of where it needs to be. And for the search to go directly to this specific page, I'm writing this query as an example. Might put in URL. I don't have to write everything, but let's suppose with using in URL, I'm saying that the search should find the word internet, research, and techniques. So if I write it like this, it might just find internet. It may not find research, or it may find research within in URL, depending on whether it's willing to group it with reference to technology, with reference to news. So you'll get a lot of results. But the bottom line is that we are not supposed to, like, whenever in URL gets into action, it is looking for words only. It is looking for search phrases or search terms within the stem of these URLs. And there could be millions and billions of URLs that are indexed in the search. And you have seen it when we were doing simulation of how the pages are indexed. You saw that indexing system has a way of separating certain URLs or links. Let's not worry about the differentiator between links and URL. Let's assume that both mean the same thing for learning reasons right now, for how I'm mentioning it. So let's just think of URLs as having a different different structures, number one. Number two, it may have um, uh, um, it may be categorized according to where it is leading you to, or how they are used. For instance, if the URLs that are indexed are internal, meaning that it is attached to the same domain, um, and it is navigating within that web page, those are called internal links. And if some links are pointing to your website from outside somewhere that has captured the domain and all those pages, but they're not basically run from within your website, but rather being captured and placed on another website, they're called inbound links, which means that if somebody clicks on those links, it is going to direct that user onto your website. So those are inbound links. And at the time of indexing, it is categorizing it both as, as I mentioned, internal and external or outbound. And then there is third kind of links, which we called anchor links. Anchor links are hyperlinks that basically has a word in front, and they're, when you hover your cursor on top, it changes colors, and that sort of indicates that if you click on it, it is going to take you to another page. So the words that are used, which hides behind it the URLs responsible for the clicking and taking the user, those words are important as well, and those can be queried. So we are going to separate all these three different types for the reason that we know that they exist in the indexing system, and therefore for you to query it through in URL, the indexing system would respond within its index with the matching of those words, both with the internal and external links that are separate and kept only for this reason. If we didn't have in URL, it would be very difficult to query the URL stem. So this is the only operator we use. Now, coming back to what we were writing, I was just mentioning that if I write internet research techniques, rather enclose it within quotes and place it this way, as I've done right now, I should be able to get to this page. The significance of using in URL is that it has defaulted to, or it is looking for a source to a partially named title, or it could be the entire title, but this is just an example, that belongs to a section or it's got origins in news as the primary source of getting to this these three words or these terms within the URLs. So the only problem that you will face here is that if you, and I mentioned it, if you made a mistake and you wrote internets instead of internet research techniques, search will not find it. So it has to be exact words. Right? And the other thing that is going to bring me something for, let's just give it an example with the second version of the first URL. And supposing I wrote somewhere here, and I want to look for a I'm just mentioning the typical wordings that you have to, because you don't know which URL you wanted to go to exactly. The idea here is to find something with the source intact, and that's all that you have to think of when you are doing in URL. And I am trying to emphasize the typical wordings or the specific words that are indicative of the source are usually the same, and they don't change much as a convention. So that's why I have given you an example of the second way of writing URL. And supposing it contains the word blogs and I wanted to go to blogs only, I would do a search by writing not in even news, I'll just write blogs in URL technology, and I would just write it like this. There is one issue here though, where if supposing there is a URL that does not have the word blogs as a plural, then you would not be able to query those, and those may be dropped, which is not the idea. No, that's not what you're looking for. What you do in this case is that you're going to put an or and give it an option that allows for the URL to be looking for both singular and plurals together, only as a choice. So when you write your query this way, you are covering both singular and plural. So the technology section within blog or blogs will look for the same wordings as you requested. Another important um, another important thing, or you could say convention, usually observed when you're writing or you're querying the URL, is that it contains the year or month or the entire date or something that indicates the the time frame, or it has something to do with the time or the year or the month. So people do write it or does become part of the URL. So when that happens, you may see certain URLs that contains dates, for instance, within blogs, or I mean, it could be anywhere, but let's suppose internet over here. In the last segment within the subject of internet, it may have 2021 and may have March. It may contain the date like this, or the date may be written as like this. So it just depends on the programmer and whatever convention they're following for writing the dates needs to be first of all understood. If knowing that there is a particular website that you want to find the information from, and query only those pages like CNN.com, you may want to look at some of the URLs to get an example of how the dates are set. So the pattern might be different. Another one, if it's not CNN, ABC News, it may have a different convention. So this is where you cannot be 100% sure. However, when you are doing in URL for something that you don't specifically want to, or you don't know about how the dates are written for the month and the day, then at least you can be sure that the year would be written typically as is highlighted and shown to you right now. So I might just want to build a query that looks so that it is able to read partial numbers as well. So this is another thing that you have to be mindful of, whereas in URL is very particular about singulars or plurals. At the same time, it has the ability to read partial dates. And don't ask me why, because it is based on the outcome of our searches. And we have noticed that it has that capability. It does segment and separate the year, even if you don't put a backslash. There are certain dates which are mentioned this way also. So not to think of how a typical dates are set, but because they have they assume different patterns or different formats. Perhaps 2021 you may want to insert, and still you'd be able to find something within blog or blogs, in technology section of the blogs that has article or titles that includes these words. So far, I mean, I'm just not asking any questions right now to see if you understand it, but I'd rather at this point give you a little bit of time to say build few questions if you have, or think of these questions, leaving my my interface open. And I'd like to go for a break right now. So let's suppose I come back from the break. Maybe you can look at these examples and see if you have any questions. I'll leave this open for you. All right. So Paul, Dominique, Dell, and everybody else that is there, you are most welcome to put a question for me when I return. If not, then we'll continue with some real examples. We'll run it on the browser. I would like to look up my slides and take it from there. So Paul, do you have any question thus far?
Actually, I do have a question, but perhaps you'll answer it as you move forward. So I will refrain from asking the question until I see where you're going next.
All right, let's do it that way. Okay, so what are the URLs the in URL is going to query? So in URL would query, if you look at the source code right here, at the top there is one URL that is shown. It's probably the home page. That's why it's saying aofirs.org. If it was another page, a sub navigation, it probably would be /membership /certification, depending. So this is just the home page. So that's where it's going to pull the URL and show it to you on the snippet sites. We have to also know where it's being shown. So when you look at it, you would see from the URLs that are on the header portion, or the tag that is called href. This is where you'll find the URL. And then it also would not ignore other URLs that are in the body of the text, anywhere on that content page. It would certainly have a list of them, and any of the sub navigations that are taking you from this particular page to another page would be shown in the in the HTML code. So all of those are going to get queried within URL. It's not just going to be specifically this one on top. There'll be others. And I don't know if we can look at one of the examples with, let's see which domain I would like to look for. Say CNN.com. So this is CNN. It has sections like world, politics, business, and more. And if I click on world politics, it shows on top CNN.com/world. And Boris Johnson, this is a new one. If you look at the URL, you can pretty much get a sense of what type of information is set in the URL. In CNN, they have set their URLs with the dates. As you could see, it is a format which is typically used in the CNN website. It's a huge website, so if you want to be specific about getting information from CNN, you want to understand how the dates are written. So if I have to find a story on Boris Johnson, which is actually coming from a date 2022 July 7th, then I could use in URL to get what's happening here. Unresponsive. If this is the story I'd like to get to, and you can see over here, it says Europe, and then it has a backslash Boris Johnson. So there is a section which is separating or segmenting this page and organized in such a way that the URL is showing you how the story on Boris Johnson belongs to or is kept in a subfolder named Europe. So this is where it's coming from. And if I want to get to exactly this story, I would write and let me capture it first. This is the link I'd like to find or go to. And I have to write query. I would probably put it in URL. Even if I put cnn.com, that's fine. I haven't used site colon, using in URL cnn.com as a word. Could put in URL 2022. Let's run this. Looks good. Exactly the same page, the same link. So I don't have to go through all sorts of results. I can pretty much be focused and get a more filtered specific result this way. But who is to know, like, I mean, if I knew exactly where the story is, in all practicality, I wouldn't really, I would probably go to the CNN site and then, you know, go through one navigation to another until I get to this story. But this way, I can get exactly to that specific story, as well as be able to figure out if it is coming from, you know, if the source is to do with the news or CNN.com. But if I don't remember the title, I might just have a problem. So Boris Johnson, if I wrote Boris Johnson resignation without quotations, let's see what it's going to do. Or let's suppose I just not put the last word, which I don't quite remember. So to find something which I don't know exactly how it is, what the title of the news is, but it has to do with Boris Johnson. And supposing I don't even remember the exact date, but I remember it's in 2022, and run it. This is practically, I mean, this is the real situation. Usually this is when we use in URL. You know, if we knew where to get to, we could just do it right away. But assuming we don't know the entire title of that specific story, just putting the word Boris Johnson, let's see what it's going to bring. It brings Boris Johnson resigns. Boris Johnson's own making brought him down. Boris Johnson's resignation. And if you scroll through it, you can easily pick this story because this is the one we wanted to get to. So that's what makes it very much of a useful operator to apply. And supposing I want to go to a blog that is talking about internet research specialist or something to do with internet research specialist, I might just put in URL. On the other hand, when I'm using or, it means that I'm giving it a choice. If had I used in URL with the plural blogs, I am confusing the search. I'm telling the search now to find both in the URL, and I don't think it's likely that the URL would contain blog and blogs together, unless another instance of blogs is part of the title within the blog on a story that includes a word blogs as a plural. So it's important that I put the or sign, and let's try it. Or maybe in URL I want to put 2021 and run it. Here I see the word blog here. And by the way, these days, with the way they have started to use, or well, let's say sometimes the URLs were very long and it could not be accommodated in the snippets because the width of it is not enough, or it may be available partially. And therefore, what they have done is that they have given 3 dots for you to find out what the entire URL is like. And let me try this one. So here, when I click on it, you could see that it is giving the entire URL, which was missing before. So we wanted to see if it has the word blog in it, and it has 2021 in it, and it has the word internet. So it definitely took the word internet, but research specialist is missing from it because it's not enforced. So if I were to put internet research specialist together, it would have to be part of the URL. And if it's not available, you won't get any results. So no results came. However, I'm quite confident that if I use internet research together, there could be something in the URL with the title that has these 2 words together. And just leave out specialist and see what happens. So the blog would not have, or I can't find a blog with the word internet research. So let's try another word. So internet search is more popular, and therefore it does exist within the URL, and I'm going to check it. Here the word internet research is there, 2021 and blog. So because we were doing it this way, perhaps I would just go like this, give it more flexibility. I just want now see if the word blog or blogs, both as an option, are showing up in my search results. So here is blog, singular. Here in URL, you have the word blogs as a plural as well. If you did not put in URL with the plural blogs, it would miss out this return page and you won't be able to see it. On the other hand, another important usefulness of in URL is that if you want certain domains to have its origin from another country, or specifically with the countries that are recognized with the not talking about US, because US has .com, and that pretty much defaults, everything defaults onto .com. But supposing you wanted it from UK, then what you may want to do, let's suppose we want to get to this one, just select this one. So if I wrote in URL UK, I'll get my results coming from the, okay, why? Okay. Will be coming from UK. So blogs from a site called WPENG. In the blog section, you can see that it has now, made sure that .uk is there in the URL. Here is .uk. So this is when you want to get to a certain, that there are a lot of times you want to get to a certain version of a story that has the same title, but it's coming from Eastern Europe, Ukraine, or it's coming from, let's say, Germany, Europe versus US. You may want to include in your in URL query the abbreviation of that country, like .de. Even abbreviation for language would do, because that is also typically included in the URLs. So having an understanding of how the URLs are structured, and having an idea of the the ways in which they use abbreviations to get to that particular or specific origin from for based on the region, you would want to include those abbreviations, and they are actually given in the book. They are listed, and as much of a knowledge you have on how the URLs are structured, you are in a good position to use in URL more effectively. One more thing about in URL, and this is a slightly complex concept. Typically, what happened with Google is that, when Google used to capture URLs that were complex or had certain notations, like, a bunch of notations which do not make any sense to the end user, or for anyone looking at things like a question mark or a percentage sign, you still see it in Google search. When you look at the address bar, that makes the um, the URLs or the stem of it more complex, and at times you wonder, how to interpret or translate that, in case you want to read the URLs first before you click on something. So what is complex is something of a convention which is more to do with the programmer or the type of program that may want to hide certain type of info or certain pages, and therefore it needs to be either encrypted, or sometimes they use notations which uh, which is very specific to that domain or structure of that domain. So when that used to happen with URL, every time they're indexing something, they used to get confused, and therefore they decided, and I'm not just Google, but let's say Google together with Bing and certain other search engines, they decided to give out a set of rules or build a convention which would be search engine friendly for the programmers to follow that structuring. One of the things that they wanted was to mask the original URL with the type of URL that is more descriptive from the language perspective, and it could be easily understood by the end user. And they call it a breadcrumbs. Breadcrumbs is somewhat like you see in this slide. And breadcrumbs is what is being followed today. So you see a very easily understandable format with the wordings that tells you what is contained in the URL. So what used to be, so these are the two comparisons, what was before and what is now. So what was before was something like this in green color. That's coming from when, earlier, perhaps few years ago, the entire URL was written somewhat like this, and it would even be more complex and longer. But what Google decided is to ask the programmers for them to optimize it for search engine to mask the original or the long length URLs with complex notation, to be translated in easy breadcrumbs such as this one. So here you see this example which says Google about company history. What it is really telling you somewhat um, easier way of understanding what is the main folder or the main domain. So Google is the main domain, followed by the folder called about, followed by the folder called company and history and so on. And this arrow is the demarcation and somewhat a simulation of a backslash. And as you read it from left to right, it is telling you about the location of where the document is and the path it would take by describing it in easy English by writing words like about, company, and history, and so on. So, what happens when you are to search for words or something that needs to be matched within the URL, and it turns out that someone has not followed the convention, and the URL, even though it does get grabbed by Google, but it is not given a higher ranking. However, those type of URLs which still are not conforming to the breadcrumb policy, you might run into certain issues. So to cover that, you would probably would, or I don't want to teach you interpreting URLs, but I have something which comes very close to understanding of how certain URLs are differentiated. And knowing that they are not following the convention, you may not even see them in the first few pages of your SERPs because they're now fallen down in ranking and may not even be visible. Um, and because HTML is something of a language which we call static language, meaning that it is treated by the search as a way of formatting a page for easy understanding by the user, also for look and feel of it. It is not a code that is dynamic. It is not processing anything. It is just moving one page and substituting from or taking you from one page to another. Basically, it is not executing a function with a logic that does things like searches, where you have to register your, you have to do your registration that becomes a dynamic form or format. And basically anything that is dynamic is not captured by the index, or it is not indexed by the searched, only because it knows that certain type of dynamic code are intentionally kept as non-indexable by the vendors or by the owners of websites. So it is going to ignore that part. You won't be able to capture, and therefore even those URLs you won't be able to catch. Perhaps it will take you up until those pages that has within the HTML the embedded dynamic version of the coding, and that's about as much as it would be able to display or bring it to your attention when it returns results. But anything beyond that, it won't entertain. So these are the two different types of codings, which FYI only, it's not going to be a lot of help, but so you know what you would be missing, and the part of the in URL that is not going to be be available to you with the operator in URL. So two types of URLs we have. One that we call static, which is simpler format, as I told you. It's a static link, we call it. Then the dynamic link is somewhat like this, which has things like port number. They don't use port number anymore, but it is coming from the older version. So there is a port number after the .com. There is something which starts as a query or some type of information that gets started after a question mark, only denotes that whatever is held on pages beyond or which is described by the by anything that is following a question mark is not going to be discovered. So it will remain hidden. And only those that are trying to hack into pages, hack into databases, they're the kind of people who have a lot of interest in these type of URLs to break into the systems. So looking at this, you could see that there is a folder called listening module, and after that there is a question mark, which means it is a query now. Query makes it dynamic. It is executable code, but it is hidden. And how it is hidden is what is highlighted. First of all, there is a doc ID or a document ID. There could be an ID here, a number or an alphanumeric character, followed by is equal to, which means that it is now taken you to an encrypted code numerically set over here as 782 whatever, and then with, and literally this code is hiding another folder, and the folder would extend further and take you to a green highlighted document encryption code, which is another set of a barrier that's not discoverable by in URL. But like I said, it's only FII. You don't have to worry about it. We are not hackers. We are not interested in that. All we are interested in is the static links. So this is for your information. Whenever you're looking at the URL, be mindful that there is a convention or format in which a subdomain is set for a specific website attached to that domain. What subdomains are really, they are segments or the parent-child relationship that you want to create by mm, by in case there is a a very large website, as shown over here. We are taking an example of Yahoo. It is too big for it to function in an optimized way, not on account of its volume only, but also because you want to spread the risk of um, being penetrated by the hackers through one single domain or one single interface of yahoo.com. So you want to separate it. Third reason is that you want to increase the efficiency of the site by breaking it into a smaller segments, which eventually are tied to the main domain, yet they are running under subdomain or as a subset of the main domain. So when that is looked at and you are actually trying to figure out if the website is genuine or if the subdomain is not fraudulent, a few things you have to be mindful of. I'm going to give you an example with writing it on the notepad and show you how some of the domains are intentionally rigged or intentionally simulating as if they're real domains, but they're not. Subdomain is legal. There's nothing wrong with it. And Yahoo, for instance, main website is yahoo.com. These are the subdomains. Okay. So the way they write subdomains is that it starts with something which is separating, let's say, a function. In this case, mail function is actually given to mail.yahoo.com. News section is written as news.yahoo.com, and that's what you will see in the address bar. But take an example of how some people want to simulate it as, or they're trying to get your password or something like that, especially in PayPal, you see a lot. It's called phishing, but from just reading the domain, how it is set, you would be able to judge if it is real or not. If someone got a domain name set like this, this is fraudulent. I'll just call it fake, because the mail or the word mail has to come before at the very end. You would have to look at if the domain name is spelled correctly and it is set correctly, whereas the words which makes it a subdomain are actually coming before the main domain name. So if it was written like yahoo.com.mail, it is fake. If someone wrote yahoo.com.password, it is fake. The only way that it would be correct is that first of all you have to read the segment or the criteria which made it into a domain. Mail can be a criteria, but password cannot. Okay, and the second of all, it is written in the wrong way. So if there was a domain that says password.yahoo.com, even this one is incorrect, because the word password is not something that logically would separate something big or something larger, but it is a password being one function. It cannot be part of the Yahoo and be written this way. So this could be incorrect and fraudulent. This slide is just telling you or giving you some of the examples of the type of domains. There are top level domains, and this is a list of it. I wouldn't bother too much in reading through all of these. Most importantly, it is just a very small segment or a very small excerpt from your book. The book itself has more details of perhaps a larger list of certain ways of writing or abbreviations that is included in the domains for you to search for getting to, let's say, or reaching out domains that belong to India or that are registered in Thailand, in Canada, and so on. And then they are also given through the registrar's office, which is a separate sort of an area that is specifically formulating different conventions and ways in which they would issue the domain extensions. In this case, we are talking about a country, and we're giving you some examples of how the country domains, like in UK, it could be bbc.co.uk, it belongs to UK, and so on and so forth. So you may want to, just refer to them in case you are very particular about us reaching out to a certain source which belongs to these specific regions. Let me see what's next. In URL, all URL, it's the same thing. All I would not use. All, anytime that you use it with in text, in title, or even in URL, is going to restrict your search, for one reason being, and I mentioned it before, it works the same for all of these operators, that it won't work with other operators. That's number one. Number two is that it is forcing all of the words to be present within the URL, not specifically ensuring that it is one long search phrase. In URL allows you to break individual words or sets of words or segment them for the search to look for within URL, therefore making it more flexible. It can find either or. But in all URL, all in URL, it is actually making it a mandatory or confined to those words, and if they're not found, you will get null results. So it's less flexible this way. I don't use all URL, I use in URL. It's not a huge advantage to use all in URL. Besides, you can't use words, you cannot use a lot of booleans, certain notations you cannot apply when you're using all in URL. We'll get to that when we do complex searches. We have a list of examples which are good differentiators between using all in versus without all. So that's why I'm leaving it out. Okay. We have a few of the examples that are basically a translation of how typical or one particular, we pulled two say set of URLs and we started to see here it is showing all in URL. All, what all does is that it finds all of these wordings within the length of the URL. So if it is text returns 1099 1099-int, if it did not find -int, you would get no results or null results. So that is one of the drawbacks also. So it has to be really specific. But in URL, when we are doing it with multiple terms, it is sort of more flexible. Unless you put it within quotation marks, it would not bring them if it can't find it. But if you put anything after all in URL, it needs to be found. And if it is not available within the URL, like 1099-int, I don't see it here. Do I see it here? No. So it would just bring null results. And actually the all in URL is doing text returns 1099. So text is one word, returns, where is returns? Returns is another word, 1019. So it's going to find all of them. And if you, even if you write it like this, text returns 1099, 1099-int. So here is another one, 1099-int. So it's going to bring you another page, not the same as this one. I wouldn't use all, I would use in. Here is an example of finding the block. So to get to this block, I would just create a query in URL moz.com, in URL YouTube, in URL YouTube. Why is it used twice? Okay, so this is the title, YouTube dominates Google video results. So what it is showing is that if you were to write a query with the year, as you could see, and if you even wrote it the way it's set, like using in URL, it's going to definitely bring you the result. But there is one problem with this that you probably picked up by now. If you didn't, I'm going to explain it. Why is it not letting me copy it? Here. Four. So this is 5. So whenever we are using in URL and we're using bunch of words right next to it, and without putting all of these within quotation marks, it might be intentional. Because even if I make the slightest, supposing I had put it within quotes and all of it like this, and if I made slightest mistake in, using S or misspell something, or I didn't write it exactly as it is set with a sequence in which it is appearing, you will get no results. Just to make it more flexible, I would probably, and that's the other supposition is you don't remember some of the words that are followed by, let's say, the word Google. So video results may not be something that you are sure of. Then how would you run it within in URL so that it finds part of it, or at least find something similar? So if you were using all in URL, it would be a larger problem. On the other hand, if I use it like this in URL with video results, and intentionally not being sure if results is what is followed as a word after video, I'll leave it outside of the quotation. But if I'm sure that these three words together are definitely part of the link or URL, I would put them within quotations, and I would rather not put video results with the word results within quotes. Instead, understanding that video for sure is going to be found, I would leave out results as a single word without using in URL. I wouldn't do it. The other alternative, I would probably give it if I remember that there could be an optional word which I know would exist. I would probably put an or and then put another instance of results as results outcome, maybe use this word. This way search would be able to, without having a constraint that does not have an option, it would be a better way if I know that there could be only two words that can replace each other and I don't remember which one of them it is. So I would use the or, take advantage of the or in this case. Last thing that I would want to cover is the difference between using, let's say, where I've used if I had used what would be the outcome or the results when we use cite operator that ensures that all my results are coming from moz.com versus in URL moz.com. What could be, you'll find that the number of results are different, and you would also see some, I mean, you are definitely are able to substitute in URL with cite, but there is a difference. This is where I'm trying to explain what could be the difference. One thing that would tell you that there is a slight difference is the number of results would be probably more if you use in URL. So there would be more results, and there is a reason for that. And when you do it like this, it will be less results. But both methods are correct. So the only thing that is going to raise a question is why are the number of results different? And if site moz.com would do the same thing as in URL, then what is the logic of selecting one from another or one against another? So let's just do this part next time, because I haven't done site yet. So when we do site operator, you would have a good understanding of what site is capable of doing, and that way we will compare or figure out what could be a better option in certain situations. By the way, just an offshoot of 5 can also be written as Yes. So let's just call it 6 and let's call this 7. So Paul, what was your question? I don't mind answering it if you still remember what.
Oh yeah, I remember it. It has to do with site, which you said you're going to cover in class 8. So I guess I'll just wait for that. I just wanted to be very clear on when you would use site versus in URL, what the advantages are of using one over the other.
Yes.
And to
And
understand.
it's an important question, really. Even for me to explain it, it would take a little bit of time and understanding of the site colon, the operator itself. That's why I didn't want to continue, but I want to leave it this way, the way I've set it in this document, and I'm going to place it in your Dropbox also. But I will know where to start. I know this is where we left. So when we meet next, it's going to be on Monday. We don't have a class on Saturday, and I'm going to give you the schedule tomorrow. Everything that's going to follow from next week onward would remain the same for the schedules that we have already. It's just one class that we are trying to fit in, which is causing the issue. The one we are not taking on Saturday. So no class on Saturday. Next week, I'll see you, and you have 3 days really to enjoy your time and not be bothered with me uh, keeping you guys occupied in nice evenings you'd rather have. So, but still enjoy your weekend, and I'll see you on Monday. If there is any questions, send me an email. I'm sure one more thing is that the file type that I keep telling you about. If you get a chance, please go through that recording. I believe that recording was on, was it Monday, Tuesday? Tuesday. No, which class we started? The 4th of July was on Monday. So I believe this class was on Tuesday. So if you go in your recordings, you should find it. And if you can, just go through it. If not, certainly we'll try to cover it. So with this, I thank you all. Wish you a great evening or the afternoons, and see you then. Bye bye. Take care.